I am wondering if it has been hot. Like yesterday, my vehicle showed 111, and once it bounced up to 112, and I call that really hot, and I am anxious for fall to get here. And they tell me it's going to be a hard winter with a lot of snow. I kind of wish it would start snowing right now. And so we're glad you're here this morning, and I know we have a lot of people missing. Several have contacted and said they're going to be in, like Janet's in Tulsa, and Vicky's in Tulsa, I think, also, and just a lot of people. So I'm glad you're here this morning. I hope you know that I really didn't want to talk again about that subject. I don't completely understand it. So if I don't completely understand it, how is it that I could talk about it and teach about it? And how is it that I could successfully put it into practice? And I kind of think sometimes we need a really highly trained clinical psychologist to talk to us about how we learn to love. And yet, while I kind of think that, I go to this New Testament and I find the language written to common and ordinary people like all of us so straightforward. And so we were in John chapter 13 to start all this, and we heard Jesus saying to his 11 apostles, Judas has already gone, you must love one another. And at first glance, I say, well, he was talking to the 11. That's not talking to me, and so I don't have to do that. And yet we saw that this same writer will years and years later write a book called 1 John. And about half of that book, it seems, is him saying, now if you love God, and if you're going to be in the light, then you must love one another. But can any of you remember what we talked about last week? The hard realities of love. And how I said in an audience like this, or an audience listening to us, or any audience we would find that we could bring together, there are people everywhere who have been abused. You remember those words? Betrayed, lied to, lied about, stolen from, publicly shamed or embarrassed, and we went on with those kind of words. And we said, how are we then supposed to love when we feel such resentment and we feel such anger and such bitterness and maybe even hatred? How do I accomplish this thing? And so toward the end, we said maybe it'll help us if we understand that this idea of love is defined as a behavior. It's something that you do. And you do this thing of love's behavior because of who you are, not because of who they are or what they have done. Now, everybody catch that? That is a very important statement. We do this love thing, this behavior, because of who we are, not because of what they have done or who they are. And yet it still is so very difficult. So last week, as it so often happens, I'm leaving the building and someone says to me something that actually ends up making me think even more, I don't know what I'm talking about. Because this person walked out and said, do you know that in recovery programs, when you go through any kind of recovery program, they tell you if you have an issue with someone wherein you had this bitterness, or you had this anger, or you had this resentment, then you ought to spend 2 weeks praying for that person. And I couldn't get it out of my mind. It's just so interesting to me how often this happens to me. And I thought, maybe I missed one of the links. Maybe I've missed one of the ingredients to learning how to live my life with the behavior of love. And so immediately my mind went back to Matthew chapter 5, as you would expect it to. And I want us to look together at Matthew chapter 5 and what Jesus says. Now you remember Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7 are those chapters that contain what we call the Sermon on the Mountain or the Sermon on the Mountainside. I've often said that it's kind of the thesis statement that Jesus makes for his kingdom. Or I have said, only others don't say that, I have said it's kind of the constitution for this new kingdom that he's bringing into this world. It tells us how we're supposed to operate. And so Jesus says, and you're not going to like this at the beginning, okay? Let's begin in verse 43. Jesus says, you've heard that it's been said, one translation said, you've heard it been said by those of old. Some, that's referring to the old law maybe, but it's referring to the way the world works. Love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, if I stop right there, I'm going to tell you that feels right to me. That feels natural to me. And that feels comfortable to me. And I kind of like that because it's the way I've lived in this world. It's the way I operated in this world. That I would love my neighbor and I would hate those who are called my enemies. Does that feel right to you? Does that feel natural to you? But in this kingdom thing, and I always talk about this kingdom thing, it's a big change. So Jesus says, I'm going to tell you, in my kingdom, it's going to work differently. In my kingdom, I want you to love your enemies. I want you to love those who have abused you, betrayed you, lied to you. That's what enemies do. Lied about you, stolen from you. And there are more things to that. I want you to love those kind of people. And I even want you to pray for those who do those things to you, persecute you, or one translation says despitefully uses you. That you may be children of your Father in heaven. That you may be a part of my kingdom. Now watch what he says next. Because being like the Father means that you will deal with those whom you like and those whom you dislike with similar behavior. Because here's how your Father works. He sends rain, does he not, on the righteous and on the unrighteous, on the just and the unjust. He sends it on, he sends it to everyone. When it rains over this city, it rains over all of us, whether you're in the kingdom or not. So if you just love those who love you, what kind of reward do you expect to get from your Father in heaven? Even the pagans or the tax collectors do that. And if you wave at those people who wave at you and you refuse to wave at those people who don't wave at you, how are you any different is what he's going to be saying in this passage. Now, does that bother you? Does all that language bother you? I really think it should bother all of us because it is so difficult. How do I practice love's behavior? Last week I said, could it be that if we behave in love, even to the point that we never have the feeling that we might want to have, would God consider that love? But did you see in that passage what I missed according to what I heard at the back of the auditorium last week? This one line. Look at this one line. Pray for those who persecute you. Well, that word persecute means pray for those who hurt you. Pray for those who betray you and abuse you and lie to you. And I have ignored that for years in trying to figure out about love. I've ignored it. And could it be that praying for someone is a prerequisite for being able to do the behaviors that we're called to do in love? Now, you know that term prerequisite. If you go off to a university over at Weatherford and you're going to take calculus, it probably says there you have to take a prerequisite. You have to probably take pre-cal before you can take calculus. If you're going to take microbiology, it's probably going to say you have a prerequisite and you've got to take general biology first. If you're going to take organic chemistry, it probably says you've got to take general chemistry 1 and general chemistry 2 before you're allowed to take this. Could it be that this prayer is a prerequisite for me being able to behave with love? And you say, well, what am I praying about? Am I praying for them that they will change, or am I praying for myself that I will change? And why not both? You know, last week when I ended and talked about those behaviors, I said that Jesus behaved in love that very night that he spoke these words, because there is Judas there, and here are all the other 11, and he goes by and washes all their feet, and he doesn't skip Judas. But do you know this same Jesus who is our King will later in these lessons be hanging on a cross, and he will say, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing? And I've had all kinds of people try to explain that to me about what he really meant and what he really didn't mean. And I've always wondered how you explaining this when you don't really know. But I know one part of that. They did not know what they were doing. And you know what I believe? I believe there are some people who end up betraying us or abusing us. And some of them do it in what our law would call a premeditated way. They plan for it and they want to hurt us. But you know, I think there are a lot of people. I think there are a lot of fathers and mothers that inflict such harm on their children, and they have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea the lasting impact of that. And I think there are some spouses that so deeply hurt the other, and they don't have a clue what they're doing. And I think there are people who get on the internet and they say things about other people almost anonymously, and maybe sometimes completely anonymously. And they don't have any idea the pain and the suffering and the extent of what they're doing in that. And Jesus, in terrible physical pain, having been horribly abused, will pray, Father, forgive them. What kind of prayers? Now, you can read the Psalms, and I know how David prayed, and David was being abused, and he was being betrayed, and he was being lied about. And David will pray and say, God, you're going to have to do something, and will you strike my enemies down? Will you remove my enemies? Will you do this? But he would always come back and say, you're in control. I will trust in you, whatever you choose to do. So in the beginning, your prayers may sound like that. In the end, they may sound differently. And how long should you do this? The suggestion was last week, 2 weeks. I doubt that that's enough. Because look at this next thing. Is it true that time heals? Is it true? The Walnups aren't here today. What was it, 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago that she had bypass surgery? And she's doing really well, I understand. But it's taken some time, and that time has healed a lot. And so maybe prayer over time heals. So I've got this little equation. But first I say this, could it be that prayer over time heals my heart? And could it be the beginning of love? And what do you think God thinks? Have you ever wondered from God's viewpoint, from the heavens, how he felt when his son said, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing? Had they been doing that to my son, I would have probably thrown down a couple of lightning bolts. I can almost guarantee you, if someone mistreated Corbin right now, today, Ben would be on his way back. It wouldn't be nice. You see how we act? You see how I feel? What do you think God thinks when you and I are praying to him about the people who hurt us? Don't you think he thinks, that's right. That's what I'm really wanting you to do. That's the first step. You're taking the prerequisite. Don't you think he's moved by that? So now here's my little equation. The prayer plus time equals love, or the beginning of love. I don't expect you to run up and grab your enemy and kiss them and hug them and all that stuff. I think we start here by praying for them. And I had planned, when I first started thinking about this week's lesson, I had planned to talk some about the behaviors of love. That's where I was going until I was told that at the back of the auditorium. I started looking at this and I thought, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to try to figure this out for myself. See, most of the time I speak to you, I'm trying to figure it out for myself. That's why the lessons probably sound different, because I'm trying to figure out for myself. Now, the interesting thing is, I'm not going to go any farther. And it's just barely after 11 o'clock. And I don't like to talk a long time anyway. I always end before 11:15, but I will tell you, the secret to this is you get the point. It's not that you get the time, it's that you get the point. And I don't mind one tiny bit that it lasts 15 minutes or 17 minutes or 14 minutes. The point is, do we understand what we're being taught by Jesus? My kingdom is really different. You're not going to live like you live in this world. You're going to love your enemies. But in that same breath, he said, pray for them. And I never tied the two together like I should have. So let's pause and take our Lord's Supper. And let's remember that Jesus was hanging on that cross, abused, betrayed, lied to, lied about. And yet he would look at compassion with all those who were treating him so badly and say, Father, they don't understand. They don't know what they're doing. Would you forgive them? He's quite an example. Our King, he's quite an example.